and welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. This is Kirsha Fox, author of newly released Son of Deception. She's a homeschooling mom to four, reader, and gamer.
Hello and welcome to our fourth episode of our first season. This is Julia J.K. Allen. She's an editor, author, and author coach. She co-authored a book with her sister despite being a control freak.
Yes. It was a miracle we made it through. All right, wonderful. Today we're welcoming our guest, A.A. Warne. A.A. Warne writes elaborate, strange, dark, and twisted stories. In other words, speculative fiction. Located at the bottom of the Blue Mountains in Sydney, Australia, Amanda was born an artist and grew up a painter before deciding to study pottery. But it wasn't until she found the art of the written word that her universe expanded. A graduate of Western Sydney University in Arts, Amanda now spends her time wrestling three kids and writing full time. That sounds like quite a handful. You and Kirsha rocking the mom job as well as the writing. I love it.
Yeah.
I have four, so we're tired.
Yeah.
Right. I often wonder how you guys get more than me done. I mean, like anything done, but then it's like so much more than me done, and I'm just like in awe. Yeah. So tell us a little bit.
Stealing those little moments, right? Just get as many little mum moments as you can, and yeah.
Right. It's like typing furiously on your phone in the bathroom and stuff like that, right?
Exactly. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, because from stories I've heard, you don't even get bathroom time by yourself half the time. So.
No, that's right. I mean, I've got to the habit where I don't even close the door, and I have to, like, someone else is in the house. I'm like, oh, I've got to consciously close that door because as soon as it's closed, it's opened again, and you're like,
right. What's the point in shutting it in the first place sometimes?
Exactly, right?
You have to listen to make sure that, like, they're not doing anything bad while you're alone, like while you've left.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But then, like, if you hear things, you're okay. You can tune out. It's the silence.
It's when they're
That's
quiet.
when you're like, okay, something's not right.
They're too engrossed in something, right? Yeah, when they're not making any noise.
Silence is a warning sign that something wrong has happened, and they're trying to be quiet about it.
Same, yeah. I don't have kids, but our dog, when it's too quiet, then I often wonder, like, what is she eating? What is she getting into? So I can only imagine.
Yeah, it's like a siren in our heads. You're like, there needs to be noise, and everything's all good.
Right. Oh, so tell us a little bit about what you write. I know you said you write speculative fiction and then the dark stuff. So tell us a little bit about your genre that you write.
Yeah, so I have started off quite dark in spec fic. So I'm primarily in fantasy. I do jump into a lot of like historical fantasy and then futuristic stuff, all sorts of stuff like that. But now as I'm like evolving and I've got a few books out and I'm just trying to do a little bit more, I'm kind of like jumping into a little bit more like romance and nothing too heavy. So it's all off screen, just kind of like diving into it a little bit more. So I'm kind of discovering myself in that genre. And the best thing about speculative fiction is I can mesh genres. I can steal. I can do all sorts of things like mesh it in and really focus in on the actual story and what the characters want. I don't have to stick purely to what genre dictates. So that's kind of like where I'm heading at the moment. But yeah, I still love the ancient stories. I'm doing a few retellings at the moment. So I've just finished an edit on a Pandora's Box retelling.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, it's a novella. So it's only coming in at about 11,000 words. But it's it's kind of really fascinating, and I love diving into the ancient sea scrolls and just all the ancient stories, and then kind of like bringing them into modern times. So I won't leave the ancient stuff, and I won't leave the historical fantasy, but I'm kind of like trying to branch into a little bit more romantic side as well.
Very nice. Yeah. I love when people can blend genres and really do like a nice fusion while doing justice to both. And romance is a nice thing that you can kind of add to a lot of other genres and it still makes sense and it still all works.
I love how you don't confine yourself to one box. It's wherever the story is going, that's what it does, right?
That's right. And there's been a few times like I've been reading and I'm like, oh, I just want them to kind of like get out of that box. And can you imagine if you just add a little bit of magic to this? But because there's magic in everyday life. And and I feel like there's a lot of like realistic stories that are cemented in this time, in this space, but it misses that everyday magic. And it's like you can step out of the box, we can make the impossible happen, and it's just so refined and so pared back that you kind of like, I just need a little bit more. So I'm all about those little moments of kind of like grabbing some, even if it's a sentence that kind of sparks a, oh, what if? That's kind of the little treasures that I kind of like collect to put into my work.
I think it's really fascinating too when you talk about taking ancient or older stories and putting them in a modern context. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So for my day job, I am a past life regressionist. So I do hypnosis, and I work with people who jump into a lot of past lives on this planet, but also other planets. So we jump off world. So when we're on, like, primarily on this planet, they bring up alternative narratives to what is written in our lifetimes. I'm getting a lot of Atlantis things at the moment, and of course we don't have a lot written down about that time period. And you're looking at a lifetime in a story format. So primarily go to an important day. We might do 3 or 4 important days, and then the death scene. And then you kind of get the story of the society and the structure and the power struggles and it's never anyone important. It's never like, you know, kings and queens and who's running it. It's always those people who are like the street sweepers and the people who are collecting rubbish or nursing someone life. Like, it's really, really important for these people to see those lifetimes. But at the same time, I'm getting so much more information about the society and the evolution of our planet beyond what our textbooks can tell us. So that all kind of like stews in the back of my head when I go to writing. And then I can't stop reading things on the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, Greek mythology. I'm really loving Indian mythology. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if it's an old book, I will buy it. I will collect it. I've got a massive collection, and I will just pick it apart. But then, like, it will clash with something that is happening in like hypnosis. Like, for example, I'll have something about Atlantis and how they have magic, and then I'll like read something about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it'll be something very specific about the giants or something. And it's like you get these two opposing ideas clashing at the same time for me. And then I'll come up with a completely different idea. So I have this theory about my work: A plus B never equals C.
Yeah.
Never equals C, right? So I could be like watching a TV series, and I will, like, at the moment I'm watching Emily in Paris, which is so unusual for me because I'm all about fantasy. But because I got sick a lot this year, I was like trying to go through Netflix and find something new. So I found this story, but then I came up with a whole idea about a vampire series, which, you know, you wouldn't think that Emily in Paris would inspire a vampire series, but there you go. That's how my brain works. So then, so I feel like the hypnosis as research for me, and then all of these ancient texts as research, then you kind of put them together. I'll come up with something completely different that you would never have felt that I've been inspired by those two ideas.
Right. So we talked a little bit about your job as a mom and your job. You have a day job. Tell us a little bit about how you got started on your writing journey.
Yes, so I was a young mum. I had my daughter 3 weeks before my 21st birthday. And at the time, I was practicing pottery full time. And pottery is a very messy art form. It's, it takes a long time to set up. It takes a long time to sit there. You can be on a wheel for like 8 hours. It takes about 2 hours to clean up because you got to clean the whole studio and everything. So that was my job at the time. I was self-employed. I was an artist. And then I had this little girl, and she was so hyperactive, and she didn't want to sleep all day. She's just a life of a party, and she's still like this as a teenager, right? We're the first people to turn up at a party, we're the last to leave. And art, like pottery, and the baby just did not mix. So I had to give up pottery, and I didn't regret it. But what I realized is I was giving up an art practice, which was my life. Like, I would skip school to sit at home and paint. I would sit in class preparing what I was going to create at home in the afternoon and at night. I felt like my day always started at 3 p.m. so that I could get home and create. So I've always been a creator, but I had my daughter, I had to stop creating. And I went a bit bananas, and I thought, well, I've got this beautiful baby. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I in this depressive state? So, and now I can recognize it as depression, because I was giving up my whole identity to become a mother.
Yes.
And artists have to create. Right. And so my friends gives me the book Twilight, and I'm like, oh, I don't read. Like, what do you even read? And I see the problem was, like, as a child, I couldn't read. I taught myself to read when I was in year 9. So I was about 14, 15 years old.
Okay.
And I was struggling. And so when I read something, it took me a very long time. It was very tiring. I needed glasses. Didn't know that at the time. So she threw me the book and said, just read it. Just whatever you do, just go cover to cover and read it. By the end of book 1, I was starting to brainstorm my own story ideas. And book 4, which was far thicker than book 1, I read that twice as fast as I read book 1, and I was hooked. After that, I couldn't get enough literature. I was already writing my own story. It's completely garbage. It's never going to see the light of day. But I have been thinking about revisiting it.
Right.
Yeah, so it's been a long journey. So my daughter's 14 now, and I have 8 books out, or about to have 8 books out. I'm publishing anthologies. Yeah, so it has been a journey, and I've been taking it a long time as well. So I gave myself 10 years before I started publishing anything. And it was kind of like more of a pushback from other people, like, oh, you're writing, you should publish. And I just wasn't ready, because I needed to kind of find myself as a reader. I needed to find myself as a writer. I'm not always very confident. I feel like it's only this year that I'm showing myself more on social media, showing my face. And there's a lot of like shame that I kind of got to work through, because I felt like putting myself out was all ego. And then I want to talk about books. I didn't want to talk about or show me, like, what am I need to be in the process for? And so now, after coming up to book 8 and after 14 years, I'm just like, no, like, people are passionate. They are passionate readers. They want to know about the writer. It's part of the process. And I have kind of put myself to the side a bit more and just going, no, let's talk about books. So yeah, it's another journey that I've kind of really, I feel like I'm in a comfortable position now, where and then I see all these new writers, they're like, oh, I've been writing for 6 months, now what? I was like, just take time,
right.
Enjoy it, have fun, because it's like I'm learning to be an adult now that my children are a lot older. But I've had to wait to my 30s to do that, and not my 20s. I'm a bit back to front, right? So I learned how to read in high school and not in kindergarten. And I think everything's kind of coming full circle now. It's nice.
Yeah, I know.
That's a really amazing story. Like, the whole thing's like just
Yeah.
Really is,
It's
yeah.
never a dull moment in this house.
Yeah.
Like there's always something going on. And even though, like I'm a mum and I'm always a mum first, I've always taken like time out during those years to kind of develop something that I'm passionate about.
Right,
But
which is
there's
so
also
important.
times where I'm sitting on my hands and we can't afford to do anything. Or if, my husband's at work all the time and the house is a mess and I've just got to like concentrate on that, but I really don't want to do that.
Mhm.
I really want to go and write and I can't because I don't have the energy and I've had a nap. Like there's that crap as well.
Right,
You
right.
run out of the spoons, the extra spoons
Yeah.
to create because you're just so drained. Absolutely.
Yeah. But then like last night I haven't created in a week. So I didn't go to bed till 2 a.m. because I'm like, stuff
You have
sleep,
to
that's
feed
it.
your
I've
soul.
got the laptop. I have to do it because it's a bit of like I've got a publishing friend and he says being a writer's like a drug addict. And if you want to make money, go and be a drug addict, go be a drug dealer because it's easier, right? Because
Right,
it's like,
right.
it's such a funny analogy because everyone's like, oh, how do you make good money from writing? It's like, no, go be a drug addict. It's easier. That's easier. It's more
Right,
practical.
Yeah.
And they're like, but with writing, it's like this addiction. And you try and get away from it, but then you come back to it and you've got to feed that addiction. You've just got to keep going and going. You can't get rid of it.
Right, once the writing bug has bitten you. I think it's really interesting you talk about, because I know a lot of us deal with imposter syndrome and not feeling like we should be bragging about ourselves in our writing. And I have been following along with the story of a guy on TikTok who I believe his handle at Oliver Speaks. But he is teaching himself how to read now as an adult and like learning new words, learning to read and going through that process very visibly on TikTok. And it's so inspiring. But I wonder if, the struggles of being a late reader is like tied in with all of those feelings of, imposter syndrome and shame, like you were talking about, and all of that stuff. Because as a society, we definitely like expect like certain things from people as far as like the education systems that we have in the world and all of that stuff where people have needs or are struggling and they're not getting the help they need and they feel that shame for something that's so natural and human, you know what I mean? Like that, Kirsha and I are in the US and sometimes you have kids that it's like 30 kids to one teacher and they're just not getting that one-on-one time
That's
that they
right.
need.
Yeah. So what we did was my husband also has dyslexia, and so then we have 3 children with dyslexia, and so it's kind of like a family thing. And I didn't know at the time, but I was applying the growth mindset techniques. So I did that quite naturally to myself, where I realized that the teachers weren't going to give me what I needed. And at the time, in my high school years, I was doing Army Cadets, which here in Australia is the equivalent to like an army for kids. You go out and you're doing, camps and you're learning things and all that type of stuff. So one of the army guys says to me, he's like, no one cares about the school certificate and what grade you get, right? If you sit it, you get the certificate, wonderful. No one cares if you got top grades or bottom grades. Like, it doesn't matter. What they want to see is that, you get your reports and you put some effort in. And that's what the army looks for, is how much effort you put in. And I was like, oh my God, I don't put effort into my schoolwork. I'm so concentrating on my art that I put lots of effort into that. And everyone's so amazed about what I can produce. I mean, I even had the director of TAFE, which is like your community college, buy an artwork for his wife for Christmas off me. So, I had these abilities. Yeah, and it was really quite amazed by, what I could do. And I was like, why don't I do this with my reading and writing? So I kind of turned that on myself and I just ignored the teachers. I sat down and I just really concentrated on like, I'm just going to teach myself. I'm going to do this. So then I met my husband, who he was funny because he had 2 older sisters who did everything for him. So it's like he had no reason to learn because he had somebody else to do it for him. Then he meets me, and I'm like, no, 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 no.
Right.
So his sisters back off because now I'm in the picture. And then I would be like, no, I'm not going to do anything for you, but I'll help you when you ask. And so he would ask me questions like, how do you spell this? How do you spell that? And I'm like, well, no, you spell it and I'll correct it. Because I'm a really good speller. See, and this is the one thing that I noticed as a kid. So I couldn't read or write, but I was an amazing speller. Right?
Oh,
So it makes sense, right? Like I said, I'm a back to front person. You could ask me how to spell a word and I could spell it, but I couldn't sit and read it or write it. So yeah, that's how my husband, and now he never asks me how to spell anything because he's a great speller and he's great at reading and writing. He can fill out his own forms. And so it was kind of like, it all just came back down to effort. And I feel like the school systems, it's all about what they can mark. What can you, like, it's all about prepping for exams. They're not learning anything interesting.
It's the same here, honestly.
Yeah. I think it's across the world. I think they've lost that compassion. And the whole idea about school holidays was so the teachers could go out and find their own passion in learning and come back and then share those passions with kids. But we don't have that anymore. It's kind of like a break. They're so burnt out. They need to go and relax and then get back in. And it's all about marking down. And so the school systems are really like, you know, they're just kind of like you walk in, you tick the boxes, you walk out. Right. And my children do not tick the boxes. And that's fine because I kind of encourage them not to. I'm like, okay, find what you want to learn from school and then go out and learn it yourself. So we've all, you know, they've got a lot of books and they read to one another, do music, we do lots of art, and they just find whatever they're passionate about. Yeah.
That's honestly why I homeschool is, you know, if my son wants to spend 5 hours of his school day just reading, he can.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like that's actually the core of learning and education is just reading and absorbing. So
that's right. And finding your passion, because it's amazing. Like a lot of people go through life and they never find out what they're passionate about. And it's like everything becomes a day in, day out, go get the money, pay bills. And it's not a life worth lived. But there are other people who are like, they find their passion and they can go through the worst of things in life, you know, death, grief, mourning, it doesn't matter what it is, sickness, and they're like, it doesn't matter. I've got my passion. I'm returning to my passion. I'm doing my passion. And they're happy if they die tomorrow because they've accomplished something of their passion. And I think that's what life's about.
Yeah, I think that it's really important for people to not only like recharge their body and recharge their brain, they also need to like recharge their inner self as well. So like when you talk about need to create, like that's recharging your inner self for sure. It's so important.
So redirecting a little bit back, can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? Is it the same every time or do you switch it up?
No, every book has its own process. It's a bit kind of like a bit nightmarish. So when I kind of explain it, you're like a bit overwhelmed. So every book has its own process. Some books I write by hand. That's because I've naturally just gravitated to a lot of notebooks. So I'm compiling a lot of notebooks and then I'm like cutting and pasting and kind of figuring out. But I always create a plan before I write the book. Because once I've got the plan and the structure down in place, and it's always an arc structure, it's never character arc because I'm more of a world builder than I focus on characters. So it's always the arc of the story, the plot. And then it's like loads of notebooks and folders and plastic envelopes and, you know, just little quotes and things I've heard, and they kind of all get squished in and then pasted out. So one book, you know, I'll do that and then put it all over the big dining room table. And if it doesn't fit there, it goes all across the lounge room floor and kind of like map it out and kind of bring it together and type it out. There's other books where I've written cover to cover and just kind of like trying to find where the arc is, and they're a little bit more twisty because I'm throwing myself a like challenge in every chapter. Those ones take more editing, and I don't quite like them because there's no plan in place. I have to put the plan in afterwards, so try not to write those too often, and if they do, it's always short stories and novellas. But my big ones, 100,000, 150,000 books, they all have to be planned out properly, because I couldn't imagine rereading that and trying to find where the story is and like really hone in on that. But the shorter ones, I find it's easier to discover them a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I'm all over the place, and thankfully I have Scrivener, and that kind of keeps me on track.
It's a good tool for sure.
It is. I don't know how people write in Word, because it does have a word limit. It will go out, where I can have all my research in one spot. You can click through, have multiple screens at a time. I have the big Mac at the moment, and so I can have multiple screens up and research going and the dictionary happening, and all of those things together, and they all mesh together when I need them. Yeah.
So to you, it sounds like having everything within arm's reach and keeping it organized is really key for you.
Yeah,
and a world builder.
And then like just having it in the back of the plan. Once the plan's there, it's like that's the dot point of that I need to hit at certain points at certain times. But then making sure that gets put away. And so that gets arm reach, but then making sure that I can discover what the characters are talking about, their personalities, their quirks, really kind of like allow that to evolve on its own, not really structure that. Because, we're humans and we want to change and we want to grow and we want to evolve. I don't want to then put them in a box either. So, and then, sometimes I'll be out in the supermarket and I overhear a really interesting conversation. I'm like, oh, that's going into a book, and change. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you to everyone who has really good conversations when out in public.
Yeah, they don't even know, but they've inspired you. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and there's been times where like people having arguments, and I'll just sit down and go, "Oh, I'm just gonna listen on this one."
This one's a little juicy. Yeah,
I know they reveal so many things. Do they not know they're in public? Like,
I think it's just the heat of the moment, right?
Yeah. So I always get my Christmas shopping done in November, and then I just hang out at the shops in December, because that's everyone's. It really got heightened conflict. They want to fight. They've got some juicy things. Like stuff comes up in December. So it's a good time to hang out at the shops, providing you don't need to buy anything. Just go buy milkshake, sit around, and
just bring your popcorn.
Right.
Exactly. Right.
We're not even hiding the fact. We're just like, okay, I'm invested. Keep going.
I know, right? Like just keep going, and then they think no one's listening, and I'm just trying to like pretend to be on my phone. I'm like, oh, this is so good. Yeah, just people who are like, sometimes if they're talking about someone else and they're doing the gossiping thing, those aren't great. Like there's no real insights, because anyone can gossip about anyone, and you can create these stories. But when they're like having these heart-to-heart things, like, I've cheated on my husband, I couldn't believe I did it, but I'm going to do it again. And it's just like, wow, okay, that's really interesting. And then there's the thought processes that go into it, like, sabotage or revenge, and you hear it and you're like, wow. And they're just sitting on like the bench behind me talking to like their friends, and they think that's a normal conversation. And you're like, okay. I'm like, I don't know how you got your headspace to that point, but the thought process was behind it. Yeah, totally still up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a doozy for sure.
Never in the food court though. Everyone's so well behaved in the food court because there's so many ears around them.
Right.
The unusual spots.
Gotcha. Yeah. Good tip. Yeah, the park bench, not the food court. I know you mentioned that you really love world building. So can you talk a little bit about like what world building is,
Mhm.
and some tips and tricks for how you do it so well?
So I'm a macro thinker. I think outside the box. I always think in like terms of like the universe first before what's happening in day-to-day life. So I think that, you know, Star Wars, and then there's a whole war going on, all sorts of things.
So we were just talking about world building. So what it means to you, and you're saying you're a macro thinker.
Yeah, so I am a macro thinker. And so I think about like the universe first, and then kind of work my way in down to the nitty gritty day to day things. And I find that the more details I find out about the world, the places, what's going on, the weather, the systems, all of that, kind of then dictates what's happening in their lives. So they might have something that's going on in their life, like conflict, day-to-day things. So, you know, we could have a character that didn't get the job they want and they're having a crisis. At the same time, you've got a weather event coming in and it's not a great time to have a crisis. So
Right.
yeah, but that weather event might affect other things in their life as well. You know, parents going missing or something like that. And then you can add the element of surprise and have, you know, a magical system come through and try and battle the weather, or, you know, it doesn't matter. So I always think of what's going on in society. How is the power struggles going on? You know, is there a solar flare happening that will change things that's happening? So yeah. So that's kind of like how I determine, and then how do our characters react to the world around them? Because you know, we've got these great stories, these great characters who are going through always conflicts, because what's a story without conflict?
Right.
And yeah, how are they interacting? They can't exist in a bubble. And if they're more and more involved with the world around them, then it becomes like a really rich experience. Yeah. So that's kind of how I approach world building, and it's just still little things, because our world is so fascinating. So when we do things like research what's going on here in Australia about, you know, dirt or soil or something, but then you look at Jordan and there's lots of desert, and they have a different approach to dirt. But that dirt might then show us different plants and different ways of life and how to do agriculture. And so, you know, it's amazing. You can research one little tiny little micro detail like dirt, how do all the different countries apply to that, and then you might come up with an idea for your own planet. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's the possibilities are endless. You just got to figure out. You can't research everything and anything, but like, well, everything in one book, but you can do anything.
Right.
So you can pick 2 or 3 things, and then it just kind of like weave it in like a plot into your story. That's how I do it. Yeah.
So it almost sounds like you kind of start with research and use that for inspiration and then come up with a story.
Sometimes, just depends on the story.
Right.
So with Heavy Dirty Soul, which was my debut, so that starts in historical time, so about 1600s, and it follows the witch trials. And Ivy's a witch, and she's been accused of being a witch, and she's burned at the stake. But she reincarnates every chapter, so it's a different culture, a different time. Like, it's about 100 years later, and then she faces the similar sort of things in that culture, in that timeline, but witch trials and the persecution of women evolve over time, and then we end the story in the future in an underwater city. So each chapter was a different timeline, different culture, and I had to kind of like layer the research, and and I really researched language for that one. Language was a huge thing, and try to incorporate that, as well as time and as well as space. So I'd pick a space and then pick a timeline and figure out, okay, what was happening in the world. So like the invention of the steam train happened in one of them. So I have her love interest, Thomas, hear the steam train in like the distance, and they could never figure out what that sound was for the first time, and getting the horse and cart to go at like maximum speed, and the cart is like going to fall apart, and trying to like get a glimpse of a steam train, because in that time space, it's like, oh yeah, the invention, like we don't think much of it, but can you imagine hearing that whistle for the first time? I kind of incorporate that sensory detail in that space.
I love how you're applying like these big world things, but in such a sensory way, because I always tell when I'm editing, I'm always like, a great way to get your reader really immersed in the scene and involved with what's going on is to use those kind of like body responses that we have when you get embarrassed and your face is burning red, or you break out into a sweat or goosebumps. Like, you, as a reader, like when I'm reading, I feel those sensations, and so it really pulls me into the scene. So I love that you're applying world building in these very sensory details that the reader can then experience.
That's why we read, right? Is so that we can experience these lives. We live 1,000 lives through the books we read.
Yeah,
that sounds amazing. That you take the readers into. That's amazing. Just into these ideas, because you're right. It wouldn't occur to most modern people to marvel at the thought of a steam engine. But when you were saying it, I was like, wow, that would be really cool to see a steam engine like that when nothing like that had ever existed before.
Yeah, and he doesn't even get to like see it. He can see the puffs of smoke, but he can hear it. And the sound is kind of like going over the hills, and he's like, and you can see the puffs, and he's just like, oh my God, it's right there. And he doesn't even get to see it, but he has no context of what it would look like. He just knows it's loud and it's demanding its space, and and these feelings that he's having himself, and the cart, because that's what he owns, is falling apart because he's really like pushing it just to have this experience, and he misses out. But yeah, it's like you've really got to see the world from the character's point of view, and when I was really focusing on time in that as a theme in that book, it was like really making sure I cemented those scenes in time. But yeah, like, I mean, I like to work books in off worlds and create new worlds. That's my type of thing. But I was really pushing the boundaries with my debut because it's quite literary. So yeah, I prefer to create entire new worlds and then see how our world sinks into that, and take elements from our world and then twist them. Yeah. How would they play out differently on a different planet?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It's speculative fiction, so I can every book's not the same. So if you read Heavy Dirty Soul and then you go to The Reluctant Wizard, which it's a children's book, it's a children's fantasy book, but it's still got all of the world building and the characterization that you would find in a normal adult fantasy book. It's just at that level for children to access. And I still did loads of research, took loads of elements from our society and twisted them. I also talked about themes of war and poverty and hunger and all of those in a children's book. And so no limits. I do have boundaries around sexualization of children. I don't do any relationships. That's my two things. I also don't do any topics around rape. Even going into this like romance category, it's still quite a bit foreign for me, but it's not anything that it's not heavy. It's quite, it's I love it, like things like friendship and developing friendships and and the love around friendships. That's my type of romance stuff thing. So yeah, but with my children's book, I still approached it with a really heavy world building element to it, because I just felt like there was nothing on the market. It was all quite dumbed down. It was all quite pared back. It was like focused on the characters, not the world. And my main character, Eli, his choices are because of the world. The world's forcing him to create a choice, and his choices then impact the world around him. But then he also has these characters where his mother has the ability to create food. And this is great in a society where everyone's suffering from hunger, and but because of the mourning her husband, Eli's father, she doesn't have that ability to create food, and the community suffers because of it. So it's kind of like there's all these consequences around choices, and really seeing proper emotional impacts.
Right.
But it's still at it from a 12-year-old perspective, so it's still not heavy in a way. Like I feel like adults who read it really get the full context from it, but then children who read it go, oh, that's really sad, and move on, like what happens to Eli next, and they don't quite get it. But I feel like if they would to reread it at a later date when they get older, they would have a new way of discovering that book.
You definitely get a new perspective as you get older.
Yeah. So it's kind of like you could read between the lines as an adult, but for children, it's quite there, black and white for them. Yeah.
I think that successful and really good children's books do that, though, because when you reread them as an adult, you learn so much more that you didn't catch at that younger age.
Yes.
So that's like I think a very valuable thing to do with children's books, because, like you said, children's books shouldn't be just pared back, easy to read.
They should be. There should be, but there should be other books out there that are quite heavy and dense.
Right.
Harry Potter was so great, and everyone kind of hated on it because it was a large word count at first. But kids love large word counts. The Reluctant Wizard's at 115,000 words, and that's only book one. Like book two, I'm halfway through. I already hit 115,000 words. I'm like, pare back. But then,
for sure.
Yeah, my editor's like, don't pare back. You know, she says, if it's a 200,000 words, go for it, because there is a lot that Eli needs to discover and go through. And it's, and the kids are reading it. They're loving it. Schools are buying it. I'm going to school talks. They can't get enough of it because it's so huge. And so kids are having a fantasy experience that adults are having, and it's kind of like helping them grow into larger literature.
Right. Well, I guess what I should say is that it shouldn't only be pared back and small world.
You're right.
Yeah, that's right. There needs to be more bigger books. And I think that's one of the things that is really sad from a publisher's point of view, is every time, like, because I'm an indie, so I publish my own books, I make my own rules. But I do have books that I have been pitching to trade publishers, and I'm like, well, that can't go because I'm 10,000 words over, and they, you know, books have to be between this word count and that word count and this and that, and they're quite they're really structured in what they can have and what they can't have, and you know, and it's like, no, we need to get rid of these rules. We need to allow for so that not everything's the same.
Right.
Yeah.
I
think stick with what they know, and it's a lot of marketing, and like they cater to like the largest majority, but there's so much lost.
Yeah, because absolutely, I remember being in 5th grade and reading Little Women. That's a huge book, and I absolutely loved it and devoured it. So it's not that children aren't capable. It's just the industry has a lot of boxes that they want to tick.
Yes. Yeah. It's a bit sad. So it's what's available for them.
Right. Do you ever struggle with writer's block, and what do you do when you get it?
Yes. So the only time I've ever struggled with writer's block is when I took the advice of someone else to write one book at a time. They're like, well, wouldn't logistically it makes sense, right? Wouldn't you be faster at writing your books if you just concentrated on one book at a time, and then you could have one book out after another? And I was like, okay. And I did that and stopped writing completely because that's not me. So I have like 5 books at a time. I write a bit of this, I write a bit of that. I'm all over the place.
That's part of your process.
That's right. And I'm a mum, so I can do half a load of washing and neglect it and go do this and go do this. And somehow I get the whole house done. Like, it's amazing. And that's the same way I approach writing. So I am at the moment planning out massive series of, I don't even know if I can pull it off. It's book after book after book, series after series, and it's just like this continuous series. And but at the same time, like, I'm studying, I'm doing a lot of Frankenstein stuff at the moment. So I actually am doing a script writing course to start in January to try and get the script for a retelling done, which I actually published that story. So that's a Franken-Santa. I blended Santa Claus and Frankenstein's monster together. Okay. And that's in a fantasy Christmas. So I'm trying to, like, you know, study Frankenstein from quite a few different points of view now. But that's quite thick. It's more on the literary side again, so I've got to take a lot more time with it. You know, I'm planning out, I'm just looking at all of my covers that are kind of ready to go. Right. I'm drafting a series at the same time, but because I'm in the drafting stage, I then move on to this bigger series that I'm planning, because then all of, like, that logical, get the ideas down, goes on to that, where the drafting is kind of like, oh, maybe this can happen, maybe that can happen, just kind of open up the world of possibilities. So yeah, I kind of have to wear a lot of different hats at a lot of different times. But if I write multiple series at different stages, then I kind of, like, I can't plan and then draft, it doesn't work. That one's going to be draft planned, that one's going to be drafts, that one's going to be cleaned up, that one's at the editor, you know. So it's kind of like a lot of stories at the same time, and that stops my writing block. And if I feel like I'm starting to kind of get a block again, then I just start another series at the top of that.
Right. I think that, yeah, I mean, I like to jump around working on different projects, because it's kind of like, if you get stuck or need to pause and think about something in one story, then you can be like, go to the next story, and then you can kind of, like, keep the engine going. Yeah.
Sometimes one character's talking a little louder than the others, and you got to capture that voice while they're still talking.
Yeah, and so when I was writing Conceal Power with my co-writer, Michelle Crow, you know, I had, like, Eli, like, trying to, like, get my attention. So I would work with her for 2 hours, and I'm like, okay, like, let's sit down and write this Eli out. And so I had written 115,000 words, or it was actually quite long, but it was about 150 at the point before editing, of Eli's story and his world building while I was writing Conceal Power with my co-writer. So it was kind of like I was in these two different worlds, and there were two different stories, and none of them have an overlap whatsoever. But I needed to have both of them in order to kind of get my mind in different and, you know, we're a different person every day. So some days I'm very, you know, to the time, and okay, I've got 3 hours, sit down and write, and quite structured. And then there's other days I've got 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and it's just kind of like whatever's at the front of my brain at that time.
Wonderful. Awesome. Yeah. As someone who's working on, I was counting, I'm like, 4 different books, like, at a time.
Right.
Yeah. I said I completely resonate with that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and it's only other people who say, no, write one book at a time. It's because they're projecting their way of doing it.
Right. And I feel like, you know, we talk about advice that we hate. We like to ask everyone what's the advice that they hate. And a lot of people say, like, absolutisms, like, always or never, like, because there's so many different ways to write a story. Like, every person is different, so every person has a different way of writing a story. You have to figure
out what works for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. At the moment on Twitter, there's a big conversation about sighing. Everyone's like, sighing.
Oh, okay.
And they're like, we're sick and tired of seeing the sigh.
But people sigh all the time.
Exactly.
I'm constantly. I'm just like, oh, life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I said, okay, go and sit at a table where somebody is extremely, like, either, like, you know, having a hard day, or just like projecting their crap onto everyone, and tell me you don't sigh. I was like, that's bad writing advice. And I'm all about, like, you make your own rules and make sure you break them all. Always.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, I think it's really popular right now, the whole, like, on TikTok, everyone's doing their icks. And I'm like, why are we focusing on what we hate? Like, we should just be like, let people enjoy what they like.
Mm-hmm.
Let other
Exactly.
people enjoy what they like, even if it's an
Yeah.
ick to you. Like, someone likes it, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
and because you can have 100 positive things, and only one of those things are not positive. That's what
right.
everyone will focus on.
Right, and I personally, like, I sigh at least 20 times a day because I'm an adult and we gotta
Yeah,
we gotta get through the day somehow, right?
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I like the dramatic sigh. Like, oh,
Right.
oh,
Yeah,
just switch
yeah.
to later. Like, I've got to do the whole body. Oh,
I know, and that's the thing. I'm like, do they like if somebody says if we're to complain about like people sighing in books and thinking it's unrealistic, I'm like, do you not know fire signs in your real life? Because we are dramatic. Like,
yes,
I don't know
yeah,
about, I know there's other dramatic signs as well, but I know like as a Sagittarius, I'm just like constantly like, oh my God, like
Yes.
yeah,
we
yeah.
have big emotions
Yeah.
and
And
we
if you're
express
not
them. Yeah.
expressing those emotions, then what
Right,
are
right.
you? A robot?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
have you
Yeah.
looked at those robots with the faces and they try and give expressions and you're like,
Right,
Yeah.
right,
no.
right.
I want expressions. I want to feel them. I want to see them. Be
Right.
dramatic.
And there's a whole aspect of writing like you were talking about in your book where the subtext means just as much as what people are saying. So things like sighing and
Yeah.
different body language and different gestures are going to tell you more than just the words are. So like we
Mhm.
need sighs in books. I'm sorry, I'm getting
Oh
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
getting riled up about this
Yeah,
sighing
no, but exactly,
controversy.
and the sensory experiment,
Right,
like I call it a sensory experiment, right? So
right,
everyone who goes into a situation or has an experience, everyone has a different sensory explanation about what they felt. So
right,
you could have a dramatic episode in your life, like maybe someone died, it was an unexpected death, and you go and talk to everyone in the family, they will all have a different
right,
story about what had happened and how it affected them. And so you look at those senses and what's happening. And like, if you wanted to research this, courts, when they bring out historical things about courts, like there might have been a shooting, and everybody has a different way of seeing that thing, and how did they experience that thing through their senses, and everyone's far different. So what they see is different, what they hear is different.
right,
People can go, oh, I could taste this in the air. They're having a sensory experience, and it's totally different to the next person who
right,
was at the same event. So that's really,
right,
really fascinating as well, because you can have characters go to a situation, and they could be side by side. They don't experience the same thing. They're completely different. And if you're head hopping, because I'm pretty bad at head hopping. Like, I'll have 8 perspectives in one book, and maybe that's because I'm a fantasy writer. But yeah, everyone will see that scene in a different way.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I always talk when I give advice to people about how to write different characters and stuff. It's like one, look at their personality. That's going to matter a lot. But it's like if you think about it, like mom of three in her 30s, 40s is going to notice something about a room or a house very differently than like the 15-year-old teenage boy that she's dragging into the room.
Mhm.
Like they're going to see the room in completely different ways, describe it in completely different language.
Exactly. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're getting down to the end of the hour. So I do want to ask you, because we talked about, we love asking people, what is some writing advice that you hate?
Yeah, the rule stuff. Everyone has to have rules. So I'm always like, nah, make your own rules, break them. Write one book, but like anything that they project, I'm not a big fan of that.
Right.
But things that I love is it's just like discover who you are and make sure that you're having adventures. So it's just like if you're living your life and you're having like an amazing life, and you're finding different passions. So yes, I'm very passionate about writing, but during my writing process, I found hypnosis and past life hypnosis, and now I'm a full-time practitioner in that, and it inspires me to write my writing, because writing isn't a solitude thing.
Very
Like,
solitary activity
it
for
can
sure.
be, but it also can be like, you can't just sit, read and write all day, every day. Like you need to have life. You need to go and experience
You
life.
need to pour something into your cup so you have something to pour out again, for sure.
Exactly. And I always look at, the writer of 1984. He went and joined other countries' wars. I'm going to call him George R. R. Martin, and that's completely wrong.
Orwell, yeah.
Thank you. I'm terrible at names. I really am. Sometimes I can't even remember my characters' names. I have to write a list.
Right.
And so, he went and joined other countries' wars because, he was on a mission. And when he did that, he was discovering politics and people's views, and that all jumped into his writing, and it becomes more interesting books. So, I find like with writing advice, it's just kind of find who you are. And I'm watching a lot of advice through Facebook and Twitter and all of that, and people like, rapid release, get these books out faster. But, once they're out, they're out. And you can't then, you can revise them as many times as you want, but you lose that magic about them. So sit in that magic, really kind of grow that magic, and then put it out when you're ready. So it doesn't matter if you do one book every 10 years, it's about the book. It's a little piece of treasure that you're giving to humanity to last forever. And and just take your time with it, enjoy it. It's a fun process. And then become crazy like me and have like 100 books to write and question how long I'm going to live, and like, am I going to get time to do all these things? Yes, I will.
Right. Well, before we sign off with our little ending speech, I did want to give you the chance to talk about your new book that's coming out in January, and tell us where we can find you online.
Okay, so I'm a publisher of anthologies. This will be my 4th anthology. So we've got The Fantasy Christmas, The Magic and Fire, When Sleeping Giants Wake, and this 4th one will be Deals in Blood. Okay. So I've got 11 authors from right across the world. We come together with the themes, which are the titles of the book. So Deals in Blood is, every single story in there is completely different. My story follows a guy who sells little vials of blood for help to heal people, and he's been given a special blood to give to the community, which heals everything. If you want blue eyes, you'll get blue eyes. If you want to grow 6 inches taller, you'll be 6. Whatever intention you put to it, and it becomes like a magical property. But in the end, something goes wrong. So I don't want to give away the ending.
Yeah. No spoilers.
So that's Deals in Blood. It's coming out in January 2023, and very excited for this one. I am looking for new people to jump in. So if anyone would like to do some anthologies, I've got 2 up for submission now, and then a 3rd one by the end of the year. And so my website is aawarne.com. For the anthologies, you just have to go to the 4 authors tab, and you'll find it there. But you can find me pretty much on everything. New to TikTok, so I'm going through the baby stages there. On Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all under AA Warne. So I'm very easy to find.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
No, thank you, ladies.
It was absolutely wonderful to meet you. I feel like we could probably listen to you for hours and still be learning more.
Right.
Thanks for listening, and join us next week when we interview our next guest. And remember, there's always more than one way up a mountain.
Yes, if you would like to be on our show or have any suggestions for us, you can contact us at the Tell Not Show, or email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to four, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.